The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now, Sunday Papers, great to have you with us. So I'll run you through the front pages. As you might imagine, the rugby dominates. So we've a picture here at the Sunday Independent, and it's Matt Hansen. Just after he went over for Ireland's second try, started the second half, and he's thrown the ball in the air, and he's got Jimmy O'Brien for company. Undisputed number one is the headline, but Sexton insists Ireland have won nothing yet, is the front page of the Sunday Independent. Sunday Mirror, they've Peter O'Mahony post-match giving a thumbs up to the camera. Worldies, Farrell praises Irish heroes as mighty Boks are beaten, but Sexton urges caution. And then Ace Reese is a world champion. So Reese McGlenihan, crowned world champion, first ever Irish gymnast to be crowned a world champion. He won gold on the pommel horse at the World Artistics Gymnastic Championships in Liverpool in the final yesterday, 23 years of age, and he just missed out in Tokyo as well. He was desperately unlucky at the last Olympic Games to miss out in Tokyo. He finished 7th at Tokyo, but he was in the mix for potentially medal places, so a big day for him. We have Sunday Times, and again it's Matt Hansen, see you in France, which I guess was an aspect of yesterday. Ireland will play South Africa on September 23rd in Paris. Ireland lay down World Cup marker with victory over Springboks. And then O'Neill hits back at critic Keith Andrews. This is Martin O'Neill, who's taken aim at Keith Andrews in his new autobiography, which we'll come to in just a moment. It's serialised there in the Sunday Times. Sun Sport, again, it's Matt Hansen on the top, Andy Slingen and the Rain, world champions KO'd, and then Erling Haaland says scoring for Manchester City in the last minute yesterday, one of the most nervous moments of my life. He took a last minute penalty to win the game for City. Matt Doherty also on the back page of the Sun here insisting there's no personal issue between him and Antonio Conte, and the Sun also on that back page have Reese to the top, Reese McGlenihan yesterday making history, Ireland's first ever gymnastics world champion. Mail on Sunday, again, same picture, Matt Hansen. It was an amazing moment when he went over. Ireland 19, South Africa 16. Ireland top of the world after defeating the reigning champions, says Rory Keane. Sunday World, if you're into this kind of thing, have a new format, new font on their back page. So, box office is the headline. Ireland lay down a World Cup marker with thrilling win over the champions, and Klopp's war chest is their other headline. So Jurgen Klopp has been given the green light to embark on an overhaul of the Liverpool squad, says Kevin Palmer on the back page of the Sunday World. Very happy to say Cliona Foley, journalist and broadcaster here in studio, as is Roy O'Connor of the Irish Independent. You're both very welcome. You were at the Aviva Stadium last night.
I was.
Even though at half time it was only 6 points apiece, it was a bloody interesting 6 points apiece first half, and then second half took off.
Yeah, no, it was. I found it. Neil, we'll come to it. I think Neil Francis is quite talking down the quality that was on show and takes almost a counterpoint view on it. But I thought it was a really high quality. I'm falling into the trap of calling it absorbing test match. But it was. It from minute one, the level of physicality on display was off the charts. And look, there's an undercurrent there. Is this healthy for the game in the long term? But there is still something fascinating about seeing players of that size thundering into each other with such a level of ferocity and intensity. And Bernard Jackman has the line in his piece. He met one of the injured Boks. He doesn't name him in the corporate box before the game. He'd been to the team hotel, and you can almost I can't do a South African accent, so I'm not going to try. But he said, he said to him, "I promise you, the boys are effing up for this." And they tore into Ireland. I mean, I was talking to Brendan Moran from Sportsfile as I was leaving last night. He said the sound of the collisions on the pitch was just breathtaking. You know, that you could even in the full stadium, they're right up. We're miles away up the top.
They're here.
And they heard. It wasn't just a visual. It was the thundering nature of it, and you can imagine that. So it was. They threw everything at Ireland. Thought Peter the toy. He was just, everything he hit was just laced with venom. It was ridiculous. Sexton got nailed about 4 or 5 times just on that line. They're brilliant at it. That line where he just delivered the pass. It's not quite, it's not late enough to be against the rules, but it's late enough to leave Sexton in a heap on the ground. And Ireland found a way. I thought at 6-6 at half time, and with Furlong, Murray, and Murray turned out to be a blessing in disguise, really. But and McCluskey in particular going off, I really feared for Ireland in that second half, and they proved me wrong. You know, a lot of stuff that I've been questioning in here and in the paper that I worried about this Irish pack, they proved me wrong, and that's a great thing for them to be. Not that that's the important part, but like, you know, there's a lot less doubts about this Ireland team now than there was, you know, at 5:30 yesterday.
Can I show you how life's all about opinions? Neil Francis. This was no thriller. This is the point about the quality. This was no thriller because he had opened by referencing Thrilla in Manila. And if anybody says that this was a match for the purist, then they are sadly mistaken. I'll flick over to Bernard Jackman. At half-time, the score was 6 points apiece. One of the most entertaining 12-point halves I've watched. It was one for the purists, I admit, but the level of physicality and cat and mouse that we witnessed was right at the highest level of the game. So we have Neil Francis saying the quality wasn't good. Bernard Jackman thought it was great.
Francis says the box kicking from all the halfbacks was pub team standard.
Well, it wasn't a good day for kickers, to be fair. I'm with them.
They got their selection of 10 wrong.
Yeah.
Their attack still leaves an awful lot to be desired. I mean, there was a couple of times in that second half where they had overlaps, and rather than give the pass, they tucked and ran, and it was criminal. But I mean, he has a line in it, and like Neil Francis is an international second row himself, and he says that Etzebeth and Diager are a long way short of the class of Bakkies Boat and Victor Matfield. The publicity machine tells us that these guys are superstars, but the evidence suggests otherwise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, he's obviously forgotten about the World Cup final where they absolutely monstered the England pack. The England pack that had monstered Ireland twice in the previous year had just destroyed New Zealand the week previously. Like, that was one of the greatest forward pack performances. I was there. I'll never forget the way they ground England at the submission that day. Look, this wasn't a World Cup final. I think they'll be better in 10 months' time.
Yeah.
But to say that they're not, that they're bang average, is just, I think that's wrong. I mean, Etzebeth is a phenomenal player. He might not be the most visionary. I mean, he threw an unbelievable offload for Lorenzo try. Like, they showed what they can do in the end, but I think that's unfair. I think that diminishes what...
He won't mind me saying it, but even during the match, I think at least 3 times, Rob Kearney, almost talking to himself in the studio, said, Etzebeth, incredible.
Yeah.
He did that was fantastic. I don't think he got a chance at full time to mention it. But so are you more in the... Because it is, I mean, it's just so stark and interesting.
But Francis' point as well, Joe, is he's... Whichever you could see last night was they didn't have a kicker, that they're missing Andrew Pollard, and that was a big factor. I mean, they left 7 points at least, and they are more behind him. And some awful, even touchline kicking. Him
and Bernard Jackman agree on that point, because Bernard Jackman does make the point the next time this is going to be in a neutral venue, they will have a goal kicker and they will have someone who can play the percentages of 10, so that will strengthen them. But I'm curious, Rory, are you more in the Francis camp where he says this was a match of low quality and there were players out there who were so far out of their depth it was embarrassing, or Bernard Jackman who was saying the level of physicality, the cat and mouse, was right at the highest level of the game? Like, they're two.
I thought it was at the end of this. I thought it was a very high quality game. I mean, Frano has a cut off Robert Balakoon. He has a history of going after Ulster wingers. He didn't, turned out pretty well for Tommy Bowe, who gave 0 out of 10 in player ratings at the start of his career. Look, Willemse was a wrong call and was the worst player in the pitch, and arguably cost South Africa the game. Not having a goal kicker, like when Leroux came on in the second half, he made an awful difference. But just because Ireland neutralised South Africa doesn't make South Africa a bad team. I think the achievement of Ireland neutralising the maul and the scrum can't be. You can't just then turn around and say, "Oh, these are not good." Like, they are the world champions. It was basically the pack that won the World Cup. So I think that's very unfair on what Ireland achieved yesterday. I suppose what you could say is that the length of the first half, the number of stoppages, it wasn't as flowing as, say, the New Zealand test, but that was never going to be that kind of game. This was quality in a different way. This was Ireland finding ways to beat a team that can squeeze you and squeeze the life out of you until you've nothing left. So I think Neil Francis is being quite unfair on them. I think Bernard Jackman is closer to the mark. Certainly my sense in the ground was that it was a high quality test match, albeit South Africa just found different ways to butcher opportunities in the second half. And Ireland, that was partly Ireland's defence and partly their own limitations, because if they can't beat you up, they don't seem to be able to find a second way, whereas Ireland are finding different ways to beat teams.
Cliona, sorry.
Just on the brokenness of the play, if you like, and the physicality was, and it's something Ollie Holt refers to today as well in relation to Owen Farrell. But Shane McGrath makes a good point. He said the 57 minutes, the first half was 57 minutes long.
It's standard these days.
just shows you, though, doesn't it? Like the level of physicality. There was at one point was there four people being treated at one point at the same time.
Yeah,
and there's lengthy TMO. You know, that they took a long look at that Colby incident before coming to a decision. But also just these water breaks, which nobody needs or wants. And it's all to do with Rassie Erasmus and what happened in the 21 Lions tour. But it's like they've come up with a terrible solution to a problem. That's just lengthy. Yeah, it's making the game harder to watch, and then it's bringing in these kind of musical interludes in the stadium that have been such a feature this week. That again just don't work for me personally. But it was. It's still, even though it was long and it was, I found it was good enough to be compelling. Like the good outweighed the bad, but there's still a lot for rugby to fix there. And this is the cosmetic stuff. This isn't going into the deeper stuff about concussion and subconcussive hits and all that stuff. That's, you know, you watch that physical and you're like, God, is this safe? You know.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask. Given what we know about the game and the price that players are paying. And even around the game, we glorified the physicality. It was the talking point all week. When you watch it now, Cliona, does part of you fail to get...
Yeah, no, I do. I cringe now, you know, I do.
It's not thrilling, it's more...
I do. I more and more, particularly the head stuff, and whether it's accidental or not, and even that contentious not a spear tackle, yellow, red card, whatever it was, you know, you do cringe just because of the pure size and speed that these people can travel at. That's the thing, like the impact and all the statistics. Or you know that the statistics are very often it's the tackler that's the one who gets the worst injuries. But Ollie Holt raises it as well, just in his general column today in the Mail, and he's talking about after Dylan Hartley's piece last week about worrying about dementia, that he said, the news that Owen Farrell had been drafted back into the England team that plays Argentina today, a fortnight after suffering what was described as a brutal knockout playing for Saracens. Like that, he's saying there's no protocols broken there, but that doesn't mean the guy is right to be playing at this stage. And he said, how many similar injuries has the England captain suffered? I don't know, but I do know he's storing up trouble for himself. Now, that's obviously his opinion, but you do worry about, this level. And it's funny, the captain of the Athlone women's team playing today, Laurie, who's a former Clare footballer, she's playing the FAI Cup final today. But like I was talking to her during the week about her horrendous, concussion that she suffered and how bad she was, and incredible. She went to a physiotherapist, and I was saying, how could you go to a physiotherapist for a concussion? And she was saying it was literally making my eyes move left to right. Spent 3 or 4 months, had to sleep in darkened rooms, all those things, and it's happening in all sports. But I just think rugby at the moment, you do. I just feel, I don't, before I used to, there were in years back before we knew all this stuff, you would love to see those physical hits. And now I kind of do wince when I see them.
And in some respects, the game at large was, as a spectacle, was lucky because last night wasn't littered with head collisions.
I was just trying to think. My PP came off with HIA.
Incredibly attritional, and we saw injuries,
shoulders.
but they weren't the injuries of players having to get HIAs, which they could easily have been.
The 3 Ireland injuries. I mean, Stuart McCluskey fell awkwardly on his wrist. Conor Murray pulled his calf as he went, his groin as he went through, and Tadhg Furlong rolled an ankle. So they're not deeply attritional injuries. So I mean, these players were able to get through the 80 minutes without actually. There was no collision injuries really, but it's the toll that it's taken on them. I mean, the fact that you're legally allowed to hit Sexton just after he's delivered a pass, and now Sexton brings that on, and what makes him great is the fact that he delays his pass so late that he commits the defender. But some of those hits that he took were absolutely ferocious, but they were within the laws of the game, and they are. I'm torn on it. I can see the danger, but I also relish the spectacle, and that's the eternal. You're doing a deal with the devil, I suppose, and that's what it is. Part of what makes the Test rugby in particular so enthralling.
Keenan got a bad hit at one stage and just hopped up. I mean, the resilience is extraordinary.
And they're in incredible condition. It's just they can't protect. The one thing they can protect is their brains, and that's the concern.
In some ways, I thought, that was as attritional as it gets yesterday, and yet it was quite positive that there weren't a bunch of head hits or high shots. That maybe look, this game's always going to, I think, have an inevitable degree of danger, and there's going to have to be informed consent with future generations. But I did watch yesterday and think, well, that couldn't have been more hotly contested, couldn't have been more physical, and yet we managed to avoid head hits. So that was encouraging.
I mean, teams are going to, like, we're just asking teams to, like, learn that you can't, like, by regulating it, by sending people off for it. And Ireland have had Peter O'Mahony, Bundy Aki twice sent off for head high shots in the last couple of years. Yeah. I mean, they cost them a game over in Wales a couple of years ago, cost England the Six Nations game last year. I mean, teams have to learn and adjust, and I think Ireland and the Leinster have a contact skills coach in Sean O'Brien. Before him, Dennis Neamy did that job, and Hugh Hogan, and he has put incredible effort into working with the tackler to make the tackler better at going lower. And Josh van der Fleer is an unbelievable example of that. Will Connors, who's currently out injured, but he's a brilliant low tackler. Ireland's tackle technique is probably world leading, and they don't get themselves in those positions as often as other teams.
Sexton's tackling has changed as well.
It has, yeah, but they go lower. They tend not, because they know it's not necessarily about safety, it's about discipline and trying not to get sent off, because you don't want to cost your team. And look at the summer when New Zealand had players sent off for head high shots in the Test series. That they were really important moments, and they were just clumsy, going into contact too high. That doesn't happen as much with Ireland. And in fairness to South Africa, they are massive men, but they're and they don't get enough credit for this. They're technically excellent in a lot of what they do. And while they bring in an unbelievable level of force and aggression to it, it's keep it within the bounds of, and that's what makes them so effective and so good. And that's why I think Neil Francis is quite unfair on them earlier on.
Rory Keane, Cliona, says the hype machine will now go into overdrive. But Johnny Sexton, afterwards and across the papers, on all the front pages, he's urging caution. We're building well, but we have to win trophies. Triple Crown pleasing, but it's about championships, Six Nations, Grand Slams, World Cups. We've done nothing really, so you can't compare this to Ireland teams that have won before. The other thing he did say, though, which jumped out to me, is on the front page here of the Sunday Independent. He said, we probably didn't play our best rugby, but that's also a very pleasing thing, because maybe a couple of years ago we would have crumbled or not shown the guts that we did there. So that was very pleasing.
Yeah,
big admission, isn't it? A couple of years ago, we wouldn't have shown the guts.
Yeah, well, Sexton does that. Sometimes Sexton comes out with stuff and it kind of slides past you.
I'd say there's former teammates going, what?
Exactly, yeah. But he's like, what I think he's right about is that just they stuck in, they stayed there, and he made some very brave decisions himself as well. But they didn't crumble. Roy Keane's piece, I think, is good as well, because he just talks about how they changed how they played as well. So they had to combine a bit of both. They had to bish bash up the middle, but they put more width on it, and they were willing to push them around and see. But it was just their ability to withstand what they did in the first half, even that early. Just defending their line for so long. Like,
it was 50 tackles in the first 15 minutes.
Some 49
of them. That 17 fails stand on their own line, where South Africa went brute force and ignorance. Like there was no tip on passes. There was no out the back. It was just carry. Actually, Peter Steph threw a little tip on, and that actually opened up Ireland a little bit. They won a penalty. They scored. They made it 3-all.
It was only a penalty.
It was only a penalty.
Exactly.
That was. I thought that's where I had the fear, was that this was going to take a toll, that they would take the legs from Ireland. But Ireland's fitness paid.
And the bench.
But I think, you got to think, Aki and Henshaw are Ireland's first choice 12s. McCluskey's only won 6 caps across 7 years. Yeah. He's playing well. He's Ireland's third choice 12. He's playing well. He gets whipped off with the injury. Jimmy O'Brien comes on. He's never played for Ireland before. He's playing at 13. He's not at 13. Ringrose is playing at 12. They never missed a beat. Ireland's depth was pretty much exposed on Friday night, in that All Blacks A game. But they were still, the first team are adaptable and resilient enough to other Irish teams would have folded in that, weren't able to cope with that kind of adversity.
And Jameson Gibson Park totally changed the pace of the game too when he came in, and you could see that South Africa were getting tired at that stage. And they had put so much effort in and hadn't got the return, and they were the ones then who mentally crumbled. I thought it was a really absorbing game, I have to say.
So to what extent does this then allay the fear or the accusation that Ireland can't handle big teams? Mostly, largely.
Well, they can. They've shown now that look, they could play South Africa next Saturday and get beaten up. But I think any team could be beaten up by South Africa. But they've shown that they can handle them all. they've shown that even their bench, they're much maligned. Finlay Bealham comes on and does 40 minutes, and I think he deserves an awful lot of praise for how he performed. Rob Herring as well. Even Cian Healy came on for the last 10-15 minutes, and like, I mean, he's held together at this stage, and he's able to come on in a test match and hold his own. France is the next big test of that, and England maybe at home as well. But France are up first in the Six Nations, and France have a certain set of skills that, again, Ireland will have to be clever to come up to negate, because they have another 130 odd kilo lock and a 130 odd kilo tight head prop, and when they get them together and it's quite hard to deal with, and Ireland just don't have that cattle. But they have shown a way that they've dealt with the Boks, and that's the ultimate test in my book. So they've answered that question. They've shown a way that they can do it. I mean, doing it again is hard, but they can draw on this now, and I think the fear that we had is lessened by that. This can give them comfort. It's not the problem. I think the reason the hype train won't get over, I think I said this to you the other day, the reason the hype train won't go overboard is because of the draw, and the fact that not only did they play South Africa in the pool, they played either the winners or the losers of that opening game at next year's World Cup, New Zealand and France. And that is a 50-50 game. Even if Ireland get everything right on that day, they might not win, because they're playing against two of the best teams in the world. France are probably, I think the world rankings probably should be flipped. I think France are the best team in the world right now. Ireland are probably a close second.
Yeah.
I thought what Trimble and Rob Carney was saying to you yesterday was interesting as well, in relation to the previous World Cup, the one that everything went so badly wrong on, which was that they basically were admitting the boys thought we had the work done. And that thing about these guys just constantly are looking for ways to get better, and that's always what you want.
Yeah. And I do sense that if you take Ireland, South Africa, France, England certainly, New Zealand, who else be in the mix?
Australia.
Yeah. I think there's a fair chance only Ireland, if all of those teams were given the choice, would want the World Cup on this month as opposed to next year. I think every single other team. I think France would even look at it and say, you know what? Our age profile, another year, we're going to be better again. South Africa, better again. New Zealand, 100% better again. South Africa, they blooded a lot of players this year. They'll be in great shape next year. England, desperate for a year to sort themselves out. New Zealand, the same. I think we're the only team. Sexton, a year older. Yeah. I think we're the only team, if you said, do you want the World Cup on now or in a year?
Absolutely,
we're the only team that say now.
Yeah, you're right.
That doesn't mean we're peaking. It doesn't mean we're sitting still and we're burying our head in the sands. It's just circumstances, age.
It is. The age profile of Sexton is the big one. The rest of the team, the age profile is pretty much perfect. I mean, Cian Healy, I think ideally they'd have a younger loose head prop who's chomping at his heels, and they don't. I mean, Jeremy Loughman maybe, but he needs a season of really good work for Munster, and that now he'll be a year older as well, and will have a lot more kind of hits on the shoulders and all of that as well. So you're probably right. I think France, like the one thing you worry about not that I worry about France very much, but like the one thing I think France will worry about is that they'll find a way to combust, which again is probably a natural stereotype more than anything else.
So will we.
But with Galtier, it's almost inevitable. That's why we're not getting carried away. We don't want to get burned by the past, But Galtier is an interesting figure. Their union is being, like, their key figures in their union are being investigated by the police, and they're going to, that there are things going on in French rugby that could get messy in the next year. I think they take it now as well. I mean, the way they won against Australia last night with that Pinot try, the vibe they have going on, I think they take it as well.
Okay. And the one thing to say is, that's probably quite an old Boks team as well, relatively speaking. They're not, there wasn't anybody particularly. There's anybody particularly young in that team last night. That's the one thing I think about them. I thought they tired a lot in that game, and I just thought, I was surprised at how they I know they got the late tries and that, but I just was surprised at how they seem to run out of steam.
They have the players, if they want to, and I don't know if Erasmus and Nina Barr will do it. They have the well of players that they could completely revitalise their team in 12 months, and I don't think they're going to do it. They seem to be leaning into that team of 2019, and maybe that's a big mistake. Whereas Eddie Jones has tried to, I don't know what he's trying to do really, but he's completely flipped it.
They're the great unknown England, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They could, and the great point that he makes, and I think that most people make about the World Cup, is that while Ireland model is designed to be able to peak for these international windows, everyone peaks for the World Cup. Everyone has a pre-season, and that's where the playing field is level. So all of these things negate getting overly excited right now. But I think what you have to do is, that was a great game yesterday, and a great occasion. We've had 2 years starved of great occasions, and I think people are entitled to enjoy it. And I think the achievement of beating the world champions in that way is worthy of being credited.
Absolutely.
It can't be diminished.
No, agree.
And Joe, just on just when we're talking about rugby, I just thought that I quite liked Rick Broadbent's piece with
really
Michael
good.
Cheika today, and people might like to have a look at that in the Sunday Times.
It's great. I'll come to that actually before we're done for sure, because Michael Cheika has had the week of weeks. But that's Ireland and South Africa. Let's turn to Father Ted's Golden Cleric Award speech, aka Martin O'Neill's book. This is just going to be a score settling exercise, I suspect. So, front page, O'Neill hits back at critic Keith Andrews. So his new book is out, Martin O'Neill, extract Sunday Times, Days Like This. So he takes aim at Keith Andrews, and you suspect it was noted by both Roy Keane and Martin O'Neill that Keith Andrews was critical of them as managers at times. So he says, Stephen's lieutenant finds himself in a hotter seat in the dugout than the one he occupied in a TV studio when he was an excoriating critic of mine. He's finding out that winning football matches is much more difficult to execute on the field of play than fidgeting about with a remote control button. Such pontification in the studio hasn't so far achieved the desired effect on the playing field. Luckily, he's getting plenty of opportunities to put things right.
Said a man who's not
that
unknown.
I was given any opportunities.
Said a man. I was just going to say a man who's not unknown to be in the studios a lot himself.
Yeah. Funny, I was using the tablet edition, and I read the extract that was in the English edition first, which is about the winning the European Cup with Nottingham Forest, and it's quite good. It's quite interesting about Clough and stuff. I was like, O'Neill, is kind of, he's got such an interesting story. It's a pity his Ireland days were, ended in such an embittered way, and he became less and less impressive as it went on. And then I read the Irish stuff, and I was like, God. Well,
totally,
there's a bit where he said,
people should
after
know
we
they're
beat Germany,
two totally different excerpts.
They are, yeah. The ones are
editions.
like nostalgia filled, like really nice story about, the first time they won the European Cup, he throws his medal on the table, and because he was a sub, and they wanted to get, the people can read it, and then he comes back 2 years later or a year later and wins it, and it means so much more to him. And Clough told me a great game and how much that meant to him, and it's genuinely, it's good. And like the fact that he wanted a couple of months off after they beat Germany to gloat. I mean, come on! Like you've achieved so much in the game, and you're trying to score settle with journalists and pundits. He seems so wrapped up in that stuff. It's quite remarkable.
It's shocking, really, isn't it? It's quite surprising.
The more I spend time around coaches and players, the more I understand that the lie that they don't read the media. They care deeply about what everyone says about them.
Well, there's a telling line at the start. So this is the extract where he talks about Ireland. 6 months after my departure from Sunderland, my phone rings. It's Dermot Desmond. Stop your moaning and come manage the Republic of Ireland. I think moaning might be the key word in that sentence. But I like moping. Sorry. Well, tomato.
Exactly.
So I mean, it's fine. It's not especially enlightening. It's fairly perfunctory. I meet Delaney. I tell him about Roy Keane. I race over to stop him falling from his chair. He goes on to talk about, at the end of the meeting, we travel over to see Dennis O'Brien, whose financed Trapattoni's salary will continue to oversee the new manager's wages. Unlike Jack Charlton's star-studded group, we do not have many players at the top echelons of the game. Robbie Keane coming to the end, Seamus Coleman an exception. And then it just goes into match report. A tentative start against Georgia.
It's very play-by-play.
Aidan McGeady pounces on a through ball from James McCarthy. We are in the lead within a minute of defensive mix-up. Georgia equalised. Just then, draw looks likely. McGeady scores wonder goal to secure 3 points. In our next game, Keane's hat-trick. Big win against Gibraltar.
There's no insight.
On it goes. There's no insight. And he talks about, I pushed John O'Shea forward against Germany, and he scores the goal. And then he says, apparently a draw hasn't satisfied every critic. Viewers back in Ireland get in touch with RTE to complain its coverage of the game tonight has been excessively negative. I mean, tune in for the previous 20 years, Martin. I think viewers on RTE were pretty accustomed to some... I don't think they were like, well, this is beyond the pale now. I must ring RTE. I'd be amazed if they did. And then he goes on to say, the following morning, I'm somewhat taken aback to hear that... And he doesn't name... I don't, like... Name the
Pat
person.
Nolan.
Yeah, but just name him.
Oh yeah, the ex-manager in the League of
Ireland.
Ireland.
Shane Long's agent.
And the
Sorry, it's Pat
ex-manager in the League of
Nolan.
Ireland seems to be said with a little bit of vitriol as well.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely it's laced with something there. Right, yeah.
Yeah, so this person I don't deem worthy of naming. The following morning, I am somewhat taken aback to hear that an ex-manager in the League of Ireland has claimed in a newspaper column that the players got me out of jail with their last-minute equaliser. This individual is also a football agent. In fact, he's actually the agent for one of our players, Shane Long. I wonder if Cruise's agent, Tony Cruz, is writing in a newspaper criticising Joachim Low.
And you're wondering, I wonder, is Joachim Low reading all these newspaper articles and taking such offence?
Oh, he probably is. I'm sure he is.
I don't know.
If you bought it just for some insights into, or as a taster, normally tasters in the books are but I have to say, there's nothing in this. It's very
old school football autobiography, isn't it?
Very pedestrian, yeah.
It's my life in football stuff. There's no insight,
and he's just settling scores. And
like he says, Roy gave some tactical insight that I thought was interesting. Well, what was it?
Tell us what it was.
Like, what was Roy doing during all these weeks? Like, how did you beat these teams? Like, how did you beat Germany? It's just we beat Germany, and then
he threw John O'Shea forward.
That was the away game, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, but sorry,
that's all it is. Like, but Martin O'Neill, I think, is a more interesting figure than this lets on, and maybe he obviously your ghost. Between him and his ghost, the ghost can only get what the man is, or the subject is willing to give. So he obviously wasn't willing to go beyond the perfunctory, and he's out to settle scores. But he even makes the bloody tired old point about how Robbie Keane was getting a bit on and we didn't have the players. Like,
stuff we've heard, stuff Irish supporters have heard for years and years. Because that's what he said when he was here. Anyway,
like, you can say what you like with Stephen Kenny, you'll never hear that line from him. Well,
like the other thing is, it's just like, as I say, the extracts in the papers are usually the juicy bits, and if this is the juiciest bit, or I don't know what else is going to be in the book, but it's not very attention grabbing on the basis of this, and just a lot of I just detect a lot of ego in it. I was laughing. He talks about playing Scotland and Sean Maloney, to whom I gave a debut at Celtic over a decade ago, and whom I took to Villa Park. It's like he's just it's constant thing. Criticism of the Irish media is heavy, and I need to remind myself that we have lost only once in 6 competitive matches. There's just that kind of constant score
self-justification, and you just want to, like, I mean, obviously there's the second campaign is a little less successful, and maybe maybe there'll be more than that, but I wouldn't be holding my breath based on what we're seeing here. It's just, and then we lost, and then we took off all our midfielders against Denmark, and that didn't go so well.
But you know what though, it was actually, for all Stephen Kenny's critics, and they are out there for sure, and there are aspects which haven't been good, it was like re-immersing yourself in like a bad relationship. And I just had flashbacks to him and Tony O'Donoghue, and just that which is just unbecoming of a representative of the Irish team. And like, he's had such a great career and so admirable in so many ways, and an intelligent man, but there was that negativity and that sense of ego that was very unappealing, and it's coming through. And
I wonder, I don't know who goes to the book, and I don't know, I presume it's probably being pitched at Celtic fans, Leicester fans, and Nottingham Forest fans rather than the Irish market. So maybe this is not the important chapter in it. Maybe the glory days of Celtic is where he leans in and he kind of tells everyone how great he was in that time, and what he achieved at that time was sensational. And the game, I think, had passed him by the time he got the Ireland job. And what qualifying for France and what happened over there was a great achievement and a great moment in Irish sport. That Robbie Brady goal was, I watched it in Port Elizabeth, and it was the first time I connected with the Irish team in a long time. It was a great moment. Now it was fleeting, and the players that he had brought through never really kicked on, and now we're having to rebuild the entire team after it. But I wonder if whoever's written the book just wasn't that interested in Ireland. They didn't know what questions to ask, or didn't care enough to ask the questions. I mean, are we going to get the ins and outs of why Declan Rice ended up going the other way? Are we going to get the full behind-the-scenes story of the Roy Keane, the Stephen Ward, his version of the Stephen Ward voice note? I mean, that's the stuff that you'd like to know. But I mean, as I say earlier, I wouldn't be holding my breath. I think we're going to get more stories about how great he was at Celtic, and look, it's his book, I suppose. It's his prerogative, but he doesn't come away from that extract looking particularly great,
or like that he enjoyed it or had a great fondness for the time in charge. So Qatar is looming, and it's across the papers in various guises. For instance, I mean, and in all sorts of ways. So back page of the Sunday Times, for instance, and we'll play the clip here because I think it's done the rounds, but on the off chance you haven't seen it. So David Walsh, Neville is made to squirm after tough question about punditry working in Qatar. So David Walsh here in the back page of the Sunday Times says, it's a rare thing to sit in front of the TV and see Gary Neville and feel sympathy, and just talks about how accomplished Neville is. But he presented Have I Got News For You this week, and I haven't seen the full episode, but the clip which has really gone viral is Ian Hislop in particular holding Neville to account over the fact that he is working for beIN Sports. And Neville gives the justification, as you'll hear, that he generally gives, and that usually does the trick. If he's asked about this in most instances and he gives the explanation that you're about to hear, that generally is the end of the discussion. But Ian Hislop disagreed that there were only two options. Have a listen.
But you know David Beckham, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going, isn't he?
Yeah.
How much has he been paid?
I don't know.
You do know.
More than me.
Yeah.
Ian, is it coming home?
What, your reputation? The others have been very gentle with you, Gary, but I mean...
Thanks, Ian.
The elephant in the room is still there. I mean, you're commentating there, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm commentating there.
And what's the defence? Football term.
I'm commentating there. Well, you've got a choice, I think, haven't you?
What, going or not going?
Well, my view always has been that you either highlight the issues and challenges in these countries and speak about them, or you basically don't say anything, you stay back home and don't go. And I've always said we should challenge them.
There's another option. You stay at home and highlight the abuses. You don't have to go and take the Qataris' money. I'm not trying to be tiresome, but, I mean, it's not a very good defence.
And how is someone like Robbie or the Black Eyed Peas supposed to highlight it? Are they going to make a speech on the stage? Of course they're not.
You can highlight it.
What, during a match?
Well, highlight it during the commentary.
It's the kick-off here in this appalling country's human rights record, and honestly, I think, someone's kicking a ball, but honestly, the amount of immigrant workers who've died, it's a shocker. Oh, it's a goal!
And as David Walsh says, suddenly you realise that far from the Sky Sports studio, Neville was in a very uncomfortable place. Hislop wasn't buying what Red Nev was selling. Neville would not have accepted the Be In Sport role unless he was being well rewarded. Challenged by Have I Got News for You's panellists, he didn't have much of an answer. I felt sorry for him, and that was a first.
I didn't feel sorry for him at all, because the reason he's doing Have I Got News for You is also presumably because he's very well paid for it. And you either go into those things prepared or you don't. You know, and it just shows you, like, they've got very sharp actually on Have I Got News for You recently. I don't know, maybe it's a political situation in England. They were a bit stale, I thought, for a few years, but now they've got very sharp again. And you don't go on there without thinking that you're going to have to answer some hard questions, and particularly if you're a presenter. So I just thought, wrong call, Neville, and you know.
I think perhaps his stock answer is you've two options. Has worked in the past. He felt, well,
it's not going to work in a room with brains like that.
No, they saw straight through. Like your logic is just.
I actually watched the clip.
Prepared for it, I'd say.
Randomly watched a clip on Twitter this morning of Hislop being interviewed by a London Times podcast, and he said hypocrisy is what drives him. So he lives when he's doing Private Eye. He edits Private Eye. What he looks for is hypocrisy. And I mean, it's the ultimate. Like Neville's political stances that he's taken over the years, his visceral condemnation of the Super League is so jarring when you see him walking around Doha with David Beckham for the overlap, and they don't go near any of the big issues.
No.
Beckham's trying to have it both ways, and Neville's doing it to a lesser extent. I don't think he's getting the same kind of money as Beckham is, as he almost points out himself. But Beckham's also trying to do. Isn't there a Disney Plus documentary that's just come out of Beckham trying to raise up a third division team in the South London leagues at under 13 level,
where he used to play,
and it's massage. That's trying to he's trying to get the money on one hand and also massage the reputation.
Be frank about it. He is hard to stomach right now, David Beckham. He really is. Like, how much money does a man need?
Exactly.
And he really wants
money begets money. Like there is no that it's like what the LP Finn line. You try sometime. You gotta, if you want to run three houses in different parts of the world, you gotta keep the income coming in. Look, Neville left himself wide open. I mean, he made a choice to go on Have Got News for You. That was like how he didn't see this coming.
You know what I mean? That's my point.
And that stock answer's so weak. It's so lily-livered. Like, is he really going to go and be in sport and criticise the regime?
He's now under a fair degree of pressure to deliver some of that criticism on Be In Sports, I would say.
Well, particularly, now this thing's blown up. He has,
It really has blown up.
I don't know how it's going to be
properly
handled.
viral. Because I think, certain things stick with people. Like, you see Richard Keys tweet anything and look at the replies. There are one or two stock things that just stick and forever follow him around. 2, 3, 4 years' time, Gary Neville could have been thrown at him in those replies as one of these things that just tarnishes what you'd have to say is an extraordinary reputation as like one of the great voices in punditry, and has spoken brilliantly on lots of
and it's clearly intelligent.
Subjects. Clearly intelligent.
And is clearly able to tackle issues beyond football, and is clearly able to interrogate them in his own mind. But you wonder with someone like Gary Neville is how much is he challenged by other people in his life or in Sky, and how powerful is he in there? He's obviously he is a meal ticket in Sky. You know, his podcast is successful. He's a great broadcaster. He's made himself into a great pundit. But you know, is he too powerful in there that no one would say to him? I don't think it's a good idea.
I would say not at all. And based on he gave his answer with such confidence.
Yeah.
Like he almost was like, oh, well, actually, I've always thought, you know, as in you've got this option or that option. There was a real sense of this is the correct answer.
This is
and he didn't.
my pat answer. Exactly.
And it kind of finished with like nervous giggle of, oh, there is a third option.
Yeah, these people aren't just going to move on to the next topic.
This is not this. Yeah, because you see, you know, as much as we talk about sport being political, so much of sports broadcasting, particularly TV broadcasting, is very light on this end, and people aren't challenged on this kind of stuff. But this was, in my opinion, like whoever advised him to take that job and do it, he just didn't make a good judgment on it, and that's where you just got to be smart enough. And as you say, sometimes you need more no men or no women in your corner.
Yeah, it's going to be like this whole. It's only 2 weeks away. I can't believe it. It's only 2 weeks away. I've kind of ignored the build up. I mean, I love World Cups.
There's been none. There's been none.
Well, I've seen the articles. I just haven't clicked on them or opened them. The only ones I've read are about Qatar and how awful it is. Personally, I'm pretty consumed by rugby at the moment, but I think there's 4 Irish writers going over. Like they're all like basically reading literature. You know, UNHCR reports. You know, they're not reading team previews and match. But you know that they're delving into human rights issues because they all know that there is a balance to be struck between writing about football and reporting what's gone on over there over the last couple of years about, you know, highlighting LGBTQ issues. And I mean, Ollie Holt is it Ollie Holt? He has the open letter. But I mean, it was a great story in the London Times during the week about the fans being paid to spy on fellow fans, and a member of the England band is one of these fans who's basically a paid member of the Qatari government who's there to promote Qatar and engage on social media. So if anyone criticises it, he's been paid to go on and you go, no, it's actually a great spot. And like this kind of dystopian stuff is just horrific. You know, the World Cup shouldn't be there. We all know it shouldn't be there. We all still can't believe, I think, that it's going to happen in November, December in a country that just is too small to have it, that has it for all the wrong reasons. And yet here we are, and it's presenting an incredible challenge for everyone. I mean, everyone who covers it.
Tommy Conlon's piece details the upcoming documentary on Netflix. And part of that is, initially a woman who worked with the Qatari bids team has turned whistleblower and talked about the corruption in securing the bid. In a perverse way, Cliona, I was reading that and I was thinking, I'm not even that upset about the corruption in winning the bid. That's like I'm allowing for that. Yes. That's just the real world. It's I'm less scandalised by that as opposed to the wrongs of
how else did
the migrant workers.
How else did a petrol state end up at the World Cup? I mean, that's obviously you have to expose it, but that's not
Whereas,
it's out on Wednesday, that new Netflix one.
So that'll gather pace.
And there's been books as well about FIFA corruption. So we've read the stuff before, but I think the letter that the organiser sent out this week was the one that really made people, and that admission, as Rory was saying, that they have paid fans from several countries to come over and do positive social media. I mean, seriously.
And there's fans in a section of the stadium who the camera will go on at some point during a half, and they will all have to stand up and sing a song. Right. That is, and I think it's Ollie Holt. It says, where is it? As for the songs that England fans group have been requested to sing, I am curious to know whether the desired repertoire includes our recent favourites such as Southgate Out, the special No Surrender version of our national anthem, and the old staple 10 German Bombers, which I presume is not on the list of songs, but you know, it's just so clinical and cynical, and it leaves you so cold. And I think, look, if Messi goes and wins the World Cup with Argentina and there are great games, I think we'll all watch, but we all know what we're watching as well. And it's,
I think an hour after the final we'll all just look back and think awful.
Yeah.
The concept of the Ollie Holt piece, by the way, it's for people who haven't read the piece clearly, it's an open letter because FIFA this week wrote to the 32 participating nations and asked them, please, let's focus on the football. We beg you, they said, basically. And so Ollie Holt says, Dear President and Secretary General, and he just eviscerates them in a million different ways. It has, just to give you a sense of the tone, I applaud you most sincerely for writing a letter to try to neuter opposition rather than cutting your critics up with a bone saw, a tactic which, as you know, has found favour with one of your club owners in the Premier League. Which, that's not even World Cup related, but it's that kind of a tone all the way through. He talks about how you asked that football not be dragged into every ideological or political battle that exists, but it was FIFA who dragged football into this battle, and it was FIFA who dragged the rest of us into it as well. And he says, telling journalists to stay at home if they do not agree with the tournament being staged in Qatar is just another strand of the growing attempt to silence reporting on issues some people would rather were ignored. While you're sitting at your keyboards, by the way, maybe you should both write a letter to whoever it is paying that supporters group, including 40 fans from England, to attend the tournament with instructions to deliver positive messages about the experience, sing certain songs when requested, and report critical social media posts.
He makes a point as well that letter was just such a PR misstep.
Disgrace.
Because it's done the very opposite of what it was intended to do.
What did they think that letter was going to do?
Well,
can you imagine the meeting though? Let's write them a letter to tell them just to concentrate on the football.
Won't get out.
Great idea.
Yeah.
Won't get out.
Yeah.
Sure, no one leaked that.
But doesn't it tell you something about the state of mind of those people who are in
deluded?
Control of that?
Yeah.
Yes, but also that they're in that position of control, that they can tell people what to think and feel. That's basically what they're trying to do.
Did they think the Australian players would read the letter and say, "Oh,
let's not do the video.
Let's retract the video"?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see, because it's such a high point in your career, and you may only get to one World Cup. So I'm sure all of the players going are pretty much are focused on trying to do as well as they can. But will any player step outside the lines, and what will happen to them if they do? Like, do FIFA are in such a bind. If someone, I don't know, takes the knee or wears an armband or takes off his jersey and has a message, a pro-gay message or a pro-worker message, or even a stop oil message, because one thing that doesn't get highlighted is oil-rich states are basically killing the planet as well, as well as all the other horrible things that they do. What do FIFA do? Do they ban that player for the next game? Do they issue him a massive fine? Or everything it's going to look so. The optics across the board are so bad from a starting point, and there will be storylines like that across the whole tournament. And
Rob Draper has a piece just a small piece as well, saying that the England and 9 other European nations that are wearing the One Love armbands, that they're expected to make some sort of a reply this week to Infantino's letter, but we don't know what that'll be. But yeah, look, we're all conflicted. Let's face it. You're looking at it going, should I be watching it? How are we going to respond to it? Or, as Ollie Holt says about Newcastle, things start suddenly, good games, and suddenly everybody forgets about it, It's the big quandary in sport at the moment, which is a lot of the money that's coming into sport is coming from places that not all, but some money coming into sport is from places where do not have particularly desirable regimes. And there's a piece in the, I don't know whether you saw this one, the piece of the Irish Mail on Sunday about Fulham dropping a sponsor, a company, Titan Capital Markets, and they dramatically have dropped them after the Sports Mail found the firm guaranteed huge improbable financial reports. But they actually did a study of this company that were sponsoring Fulham and discovered that their video, which has all these people videoed who are data engineer, data analysts, chief technology officers, they're all actors and models. They don't exist.
There's been a surprising amount of very odd Premier League sponsorship deals with rogue companies almost. I don't know, there's a Wild West aspect to what's going on.
Jossimer have done a couple of really interesting, lengthy pieces, fairly dense pieces about it. And a lot of money washing around that world. Not accusing any one football club of being money launderers, but there is money coming into that world. I mean, I think some of the suggestion is that some of the big state-owned clubs are basically finding new ways of creating sponsors to get money in to get around financial fair play, but there does seem to be also just dark money going into the Premier League from all sorts of quarters, and it's very bizarre.
It's good to see it exposed, and it's good to see it being questioned, but it is interesting, isn't it?
You look at the sponsors at games, and I know it's a global sport now, but I don't recognise. I mean, you used to be Draper Tools and people like that, and Southampton jersey, and it's just no one knows half the brands that are there.
You have to Google. You have to go in and say, who are they?
Yeah, and I know money is at a point now where companies just need money, you're losing money if you're sitting on it. So you're just basically have to get your money into sponsorship is a good way of getting your money out there for legitimate companies who want to do that, and that's one of the reasons they do it. But there's some brands you're just like, I don't know what their thought process is behind this.
There's a great interview, you both picked it out, with Andrei Shevchenko with David Walsh, page 16 and 17 of the Sunday Times. And I mean, it starts off, Andrei Shevchenko has a very nice life for himself. Footballing legend, Ballon d'Or winner 2004. So they meet at Wentworth Golf Club, which is as prestigious as golf clubs get in London, near into West London, where Shevchenko now lives, beautiful part of the world. Near the entrance, he bumps into Harry Kane. I don't know about you, I don't bump into Harry Kane at my golf course. Well done last night, he says, of Spurs' last minute win. You don't want to see how bad we were in the first half, Kane whispers back. And he notes, David Walsh notes, after Gary Lineker, Shevchenko became the second professional footballer to be accepted as a member of the nearby Sunningdale Golf Club. So he lives in London, and he's lived in London for 16 years, Shevchenko. He's married to an American, he speaks Italian, 4 children. Life is very good. And of course, then the war in Ukraine happens. And he reflects on his childhood briefly, because I guess he was of an age where things were changing rapidly. Was at a football tournament in Moscow as a 14-year-old in 1991. When we left Moscow, we were part of the USSR. When we arrived home in Kyiv, we were part of the Ukraine. Everything changed so quickly. When we arrived at the train station, Ukrainian flags were everywhere, people celebrating. At the time, I didn't really understand it. You're 14 years old. But between Moscow and Kyiv, we always knew there was a difference. And he says, we'd been living in a false reality of unity. And now there was something I'd never known, freedom. And he remembered shortly after Ukraine independence, an under-16 game against Holland, 30,000 fans turned up. That evening, everything clicked. Playing for Ukraine felt more important than anything else. And he remembers the Ukraine-Russia qualifiers for the European Championships in 2000, for Euro 2000. Ukraine won 3-2 in Kyiv. They drew 1-1 at the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow. Both games huge because of the rivalry. When we went to Moscow, it was considered unsafe for us to be in a hotel. We slept at the Ukrainian embassy. I suppose the harrowing aspect, Cliona, is when he talks about, well, his mother and his sister, and they didn't want to leave at first, and they slept in corridors in their apartments, so they had 2 walls between them and the point where the rocket might strike. Close by were always ready-packed suitcases. His mother's health deteriorated rapidly, and in the end they just said, you have to get out, and so they managed to get out and get to Italy. But he has been as haunted and distraught as, I suppose, any Ukrainian looking on. He's visited 5 times. There's a really good photo of him. I just think the photo, his face looks really harrowing. And he's visited the country 5 times. Well, not only that, but he's actually gone back and he's working. He went back and he met Zelensky, and then he's working for this Unite 24, which is a fundraising platform to rebuild Ukraine. And now, equality. Well, we're talking about sports journalism, not asking hard questions. Somebody of David Walsh's quality, you expect him to ask the hard question, and he does. And he may have done it very late in the interview, as we often try and do. Just before you go out the door, get the good stuff and then get out. Yeah. But he does, the end of it finishes with him. He does ask him about his relationship with Abramovich. And he says, during his Chelsea years, 2006-09, he was sometimes seen in Roman Abramovich's box. They were friends. I ask if he's had recent contact with the club's former owner. I haven't spoken with them since the war started, but I've been reading he's been doing a lot for the peace efforts, which is, always has been there in the background, and nobody knows exactly what that situation is. My position is clear. I ask myself, what are you going to do? I decide I'm going to stand up for my country. I'm going to help my country because that is the right thing to do. This is our land. This is our future. I just think, I'm amazed at the lack of coverage in sport about Ukrainians. We had European Championships in athletics during the summer, Ukrainians winning medals, and actually there was very little coverage of how are they doing it. The Dublin City Marathon last week, Roy ran it. There was a lovely scene afterwards. I was inside in the mix zone, and there was a Ukrainian woman running it who actually has won it twice before, a veteran, and she was having a picture taken with Courtney Maguire, the young Clonmel who just won it, with the Ukrainian flag. And she actually said to me, I wasn't fit. The Ukrainian woman said, I wasn't fit coming here. I ran it for peace. And I don't think we're not talking to people enough or asking people, Ukrainian athletes enough about how
how do you keep doing this, and what are your circumstances? And you know, it's become very easy to forget that war is continuing, and I think that sport is one place that you can highlight it.
Yeah.
I interviewed a woman in City West recently whose daughter is a young 14-year-old who's literally going across town to play volleyball, because when they arrived as refugees, they were based at Dublin Airport in a hotel there, and then they got moved overnight, and this kid is a really good volleyball player and played at home. But her mother said, she was looking at my hair, and we were laughing before we started chatting, and I said yours is nice as well, and she had a lovely woman who was helping them in Ireland with her, and she said her hair had turned grey. She had to put dye in it. She said my hair has turned grey since the war.
It's very.
She's a young woman.
Very striking that the 2000 game. Like, I mean, most of us, I think, were oblivious of the tension. I think, you know, we kind of followed these things from afar. The Berlin Wall comes down, you know, these countries become independent, and we sometimes play football against them. But the fact that they had to go to stay in the embassy 22 years before the outbreak of war, the tensions were that high. And just when we were talking about Qatar earlier, my mind went back to 4 years ago when, you know, basically FIFA and the world legitimised Putin's regime by having a World Cup in Putin's Russia. And you know, Conor McGregor was in corporate box with him before the game, and Infantino was, you know, glad handing around, and like a lot of my colleagues who were there had a great time, and we're like, gee, Russia's not so bad, you know, because they put on a good show for the 4 or 5 weeks that it was on, and it's that sports washing of a different, maybe it's a different version of sports washing, or maybe it's the same thing. But you know, it's 4 years ago. Russia was the centre of the universe for a very different reason, and
Funny, Shevchenko says this war didn't start 8 months ago. Crimea. It started with the invasion of Crimea 8 years ago.
Yeah.
If you let the bully take some piece of what he wants, he's going to come back for more. That was the big mistake everybody made. We let the bully take what he wanted. I often wonder, you know, having not lived through, for instance, World War II, like, say here, where we weren't directly involved, was everybody consumed with this at every moment? And now increasingly I feel, having seen the way we're so not consumed with the war in Ukraine,
they weren't.
Which we were at the start.
I talked to my granny about it. My granny passed away this year, but she lived through the war, and she was actually in England at the outbreak of war, and her mother went and got the 3 kids and brought them home. They'd been sent over for a better life, and she went and got them and brought them home. And she said all they thought about was food, because not all, but the war was so far away, but the food shortages were real. So I think that's where people were consumed. But I read a book about German spies. I can't remember the guy's name who wrote it, but German spies in Ireland during the war, and like our life was going on relatively normally. I think there was, you know, at government level there was concerns, and there was, you know, lots of things going on. Like, you know, you would have people landing in the dark of night, but really I think normal life went on as relatively normal, although they didn't have access to the same level of food that they would have had.
Shevchenko is interesting though, Joe, because and it's indicative really of the complications of this thing, because he says both of his grandparents fought for Russia in the Second World War, and even it's the nuances of it that are so difficult for people, because I was really struck when I was interviewing that woman and her daughter. The daughter settled in this particular volleyball club in Santry, which is a really, really successful volleyball club in Ireland, because the assistant coach is Russian and speaks Russian, and she speaks Russian in Ukraine. And there's a connection, a human connection, and it's nothing to do with politics or war. But it is fascinating to see. You know, I just feel I feel we're all just getting on with our lives now, and I am amazed at how, as I said, Ukrainian athletes in lots of sports, and that woman actually, the PR information had been that she was living in Austria, the woman who came over for the Dublin Marathon, but actually she told me she was living in Kyrgyzstan and has been living in Kyrgyzstan since the war, and that's where she's been training, and she hasn't been home since.
But it's amazing how it's just completely fallen off the news agenda in daily life. I'm not talking about it nearly half enough with people. I find you are more likely to find middle class people who can afford their petrol given out about the price of petrol on the media than talking about the deaths.
Yeah, or the Tory party for a few weeks. I mean, the news cycle.
It's just human nature.
It is, and there's only so much. Because I mean, at the time, I tuned into BBC News every night, and you know, Clive Murray was over there, and it was enthralling. But over time, war becomes drudgery. You know, it becomes small gains on a certain front, and it's very hard to place it because you don't really know the country that well, and you kind of hear the odd time. You know, I've a Ukraine. Gavin Sheridan curates a Ukraine list on Twitter, which I have on my Twitter, and I used to go into it quite frequently, and I do it less and less now. And I go in now, and I'm like, I'm not really sure what's going on here anymore. And some outlets like the New York Times and Guardian still lead with it every day. It's still very, very centre, but I think everywhere else has kind of moved on to them, like, because the cost of living crisis, which is linked inextricably to Ukraine, is important in people's day-to-day lives, and there is only so much I think people have a tolerance for, and when it comes to that level of bad news and misery.
Me included. Like, there's no.
And I was interested in the element in that side of it, in that, you know, with sport helping people here, you know, helping refugees in Ireland, you know, what effect had it had on their lives, and Irish volleyball actually was one of the first. It was one of the first sports I think to say, we'll give you free membership, we'll give you free gear, you can keep playing, and it's proved a lifeline to this particular kid who gets the Lewis from City West into town and then gets a bus out to training. And that's what that kid is prepared to do. And she's studying here for her junior cert, and she studies at night online in Ukraine for her junior cert, because it's her junior cert year in Ukraine, and she wants to get it as well. Amazing people do.
If you told her that a year ago.
Yeah, imagine.
An amazing interview with Christy O'Connor and Westmeath footballer Luke Loughlin in the Sunday Times. So Luke Loughlin is playing in today's Leinster Club quarter-final. He was part of the Westmeath team that won the Tailteann Cup in July. He didn't go on the team holiday for very good reason. So Christy O'Connor writes, Loughlin has had to construct a psychological firewall to prevent him from returning to that dark world. He has spent so many years being guided by the demons in his mind that he knows how drink can always forge an opening and make a renewed offer, and how easy alcohol, drugs and addiction can become his refuge again. So Luke Loughlin here is just so open. A few pints was never drinking for me. Being drunk for 6 or 7 days, that was drinking. If I take one drink, I just fast forward 5 hours in my mind and think where I could be, and I know exactly where I'll be. I'll be taking drugs out of my head, not caring about anyone or anything. So he talks about, you know, he's been a player in and out of the Westmeath side for a long time. Everyone knew I had talent, but everyone also knew I was an effing headbanger. Which is sums it up neatly, I suppose. And he was in the panel as a 19-year-old, and he's just had issues right the way through his 20s, with alcohol, with gambling, with drugs, a feeling of worthlessness. He never knew his father. He had issues with abandonment and rejection, ignored a whole set of other problems around self-esteem and body image. It combusted into a desire for self-destruction. He would have depressive episodes as well, where he talks about staying in his bed for 10 days on end, not washing, not brushing his teeth, feeling awful. And what seems to have culminated in him getting the help he needed in July of 2021, and he's been sober since then, was his mother had texted him, and she said she couldn't do it anymore. My mother said she hadn't slept in 10 years because of me. She said the only time she slept was when I was in a depressive state in bed, because she knew where I was, and I knew it was time to get help. And he has an extraordinary line. I suspect it's one of those lines you hear in therapy, but it really kind of beautifully put. He talks about getting drunk, and his problems would only get worse. Then he said, a drunk mind speaks a sober heart. A drunk mind speaks a sober heart. When everyone was thinking I was having a great time, I was dying inside. I couldn't face a hangover. I had to keep going. I had to keep out of my mind. I couldn't stay sober because I was in so much pain. But I got to a stage where I couldn't hide it anymore. So last drink in July of 2021, and a year later wins the Tailteann Cup at Westmeath and seems to be in a great place. And Leinster quarter-final today. You first mentioned that one to us, Cliona, and I hadn't heard of Luke Loughlin or his story. You read that, you think, oh my God, wow.
Yeah, really, really well written by Christy O'Connor and really well told by Luke Loughlin. And I was saying to Roy, I was talking to Jack Cooney 2 weeks ago at I was working at the Championship 15, which is the GA All-Stars for the second tier and lower tier teams, and they gave them a brilliant night, deservedly so, in Croke Park. And I ended up talking to Jack Cooney at the end of the night, just we're chatting off the record, and I said to him, I was really struck by the Westmeath players that night. They were just incredibly united. They were incredibly nice. They were all lovely. But I just thought these guys are there's a real brotherhood there. And just happened to say to him, like, what an amazing achievement. And he's not managing them anymore, of course. So he's moved on, and he's working in Croke Park now. He's working in coaching, and he's obsessed with coaching and people. That's what his big thing is. And I said to him, God, what a year. You know, what was the biggest thing? And he said, Luke Loughlin. Which I thought was really interesting. And he said that we got that guy, that he's safe, and that he said the rest of the team had really taken care of him.
Wow.
which was a brilliant, just really, really great insight into him as a coach and into the rest of them. And then this is it from his point of view. And he ended up going down to Coonwera, which anybody who knows, anybody who's had alcohol problems, it's one of the main addiction recovery centres in Ireland. A tough place to be from all accounts that you read and hear, and that's really finally what helped. But obviously the football helped hugely as well. There's an amazing line that Cooney got him back into Westmeath in 2019, and he walked off during his first training session. Cooney dropped him twice during the league, but Loughlin started the Division 3 final, and that's what I got from Jack, was just like he kept pressing this guy because he just knew he knew this guy was a good guy. He just really felt he wanted to turn him around, and how the rest of the players had helped him. But he said he hadn't drunk in 2 months, but a week before the championship, Loughlin went out to watch the Champions League final, and the switch flicked. Carnage was an inevitable byproduct, and he decided to have a house party, right? And the selectors arrived at the apartment the next morning, and I was inside dancing with a cigarette and a can in my Westmeath gear, and that shows, like, for somebody who's in the throes of addiction, how easily that switch can flick. It's just incredible.
He was Westmeath's top scorer against the Dubs on the back of an 8-day bender, which just shows he was able to, for a time, have it both ways, but it caught up on him. And like, I think in the previous year, we might have been in here 20 years ago doing a similar slot, and that'd be kind of a legendary story that he was telling, more for himself than against himself. It's maybe that's a good sign of how things have things have changed, and he's able to see his problems. But I mean, the openness with which he's able to do it, it's an incredible piece of work.
Yeah, amazing.
He never did an S&C session until this year.
Yeah,
that's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. And he's playing for the Downs, who had a big success this year. So absolutely brilliant. And like, he talks about his turning point really was his mother. His mother got through to him, and very often families can't. Even families who speak, as honestly as they can, they didn't. But he says he had been missing for a week, and his mum texted him, and he just left a house party high on drugs. But her words, George, she said she couldn't do this anymore. My mother said she hadn't slept in 10 years because of me. She said the only time she slept was when I was in a depressive state in bed, because she knew where I was. I knew it was time to go. Like, that's how bad this guy was. And like he says, and he says early in it, he never knew his father. His mother was his mother and father. He just dearly loves his mother, clearly. But when it's that serious, but fantastic story. Wish him well. Wish he continues to stay clean, because that's the hard part. For him. Yeah. But I can say, just on the basis of that night, he's got good friends in the Westmeath football team.
Just to finish then, because we're out of time, you both liked what Philip Lanigan produced in the Mail on Sunday?
Yeah, fantastic. I think we mentioned World War II earlier. He interviews is Jimmy Gray. I think he was born in where have I got it here? Jimmy was born in Jimmy Gray. These are two legends of Dublin football. They've both kind of recounted their lives in books recently, and he sat down with Jimmy Gray and Mickey Whelan. And Jimmy Gray was born in 1929, the year of the Wall Street crash, and Mickey Whelan was born in 1939, the year World War II started. And it's
the picture of the two of them hand around the shoulder makes the piece in a way as well.
It does, and the yarns. I mean, there are. This is not this is not like Luke Loughlin. This is a kind of reeling in the years of two men who shaped Dublin GAA, along with Kevin Heffernan and a few others, over the last, like, more than half a century, really. They've been incredibly influential figures. There's a great story about Christy Ring, who was playing. There's stories about Charlie Haughey. There's Jack Charlton. Like, Mickey ends up in with Jack Charlton in the team the night to beat Romania. It's about looking at the word count. What'd you say, Cliona? About 3,000 words, maybe 4.
Well, virtually everyone a gem.
And it's great. It's just loads and loads of yarns.
Martin O'Neill, isn't it?
Yeah, there's so much insight in it. So much good stories. Two guys who clearly get on really well together. Still, we don't often get interviews with octogenarians, or I don't know what is Jimmy Gray in his 90s? He probably
93.
is.
One is 93.
I don't even know what you call a 93-year-old. I won't try to make up a word. But, you don't often get people who go back that far and clearly recall their lives with great clarity, and they've lived lives. I mean, they were around Heffernan. They talk about the first interaction. One of them, the first interaction he had.
Jimmy Gray.
Jimmy Gray's one of Heffernan's first acts to offer him a cigarette. And then later on, he says, I think it's him, or maybe it's Whelan, I'm mixing them up, but he says, one of my great regrets is that I smoked. I shouldn't have smoked. And it's one thing I've learned over the years. It's a lovely piece. It's a really good read.
Got everything
I'm very
in.
interested in Dublin GA, so it appeals. I'm part of the target market, but I think anyone will get a lot from
I'm not
this.
from Dublin, and I just think it's just a brilliant read, and just so indicative of why we should never stop talking to older people as well, because these two gentlemen, anybody who's ever met them knows how vibrant and how full of life they are and how interested they are in everything. Jimmy worked as chairman of the Dublin County Board, but there's just Barbara Bush is in here. I mean, there's everything in here.
Well, how's
or
Barbara Bush in
Laura Bush,
Laura
rather.
Bush,
Yeah.
yeah.
Bertie was with Patrick's Day. Bertie was over in the White House, and he was away for 5 days, and he loved to be at the club finals, and he had an aide coming in and out during the meeting, and Laura Bush, First Lady, wondered whether there were alarm bells coming from Ireland. She said, Taoiseach, have you problems at home? And he said, the aide de camp is coming in. And I said, oh, no, he's just giving me the scores. But it has everything, including, as I said, the one that cracked me up is just as they're about to leave, and there's a lovely story about Stephen Cluxton as well, about how he was keeping in touch with Mickey Whelan during lockdown and making sure he did everything he needed.
Was he?
Yeah, look, I let people read it. It's a really lovely read, but just everything, as I said, the antithesis to Martin O'Neill, full of humanity, full of love of life, full of brilliant yarns. The Christy Ring stuff is absolutely
So what's the Christy
amazing.
Ring story?
Well, they ended up on a tour with Christy Ring. And All-Stars, an American invitation thing, but Ring played football as well as hurling, which I didn't know.
In his 50s.
He was 50 at the time, yeah. And he went over, and at half-time he called Mick O'Connell and myself over. I didn't come down here to lose, he said, 50 years of age. And he said to Mick, oh, every ball you bet, you better give it to him and you better score. And then there's a brilliant story about him meeting Christy Ring subsequently off the field. This is Jimmy, and he's down.
He left one on Jimmy. He left one on Jimmy in the game. He basically
that's
actually
right.
took him out of the game.
Yeah, he took him.
When Dublin played Cork, and then a couple of years later, Cliona take it up.
He meets him. He meets him. He was down at the Sugar Company, and Etna Haughey, who was Charlie's sister, was the receptionist, and she said, "There's a gentleman over there asking for you," and it was Christy Ring, whose niece had applied for a job, and he was saying, "Listen, that young lassie of mine, she's the best one for that job. You better make sure she gets it, and don't forget the lesson I taught you in Cork that day." And it's just like, because Christy Ring definitely was just a man who was obsessed.
Tough
man. I
man.
mean, hard as nails, But it's just brilliant, it's just exactly what you want to read if you want to get insight. And they're apparently, both of them, I think, have books coming out in the Hero books, which is Liam Hayes' company does them, and some of them are really fantastic, and it looks as if both of those might have a book coming out. But it's very hard, I don't know whether you find out, Rory, it's very hard when you interview two people together to put it together well. It takes ages, and Philip just does such a good job here. Like the quality of the writing is so good because he manages to get so much in.
Okay.
Very good.
That's a good note to finish on. I think we are out of time. Rory O'Connor, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Cliona
Joe.
Foley, thanks guys.